Today's the first day of May, and you know what that means. The Treasury Department has just released the new I-bond rates that will be in effect over the next 6 months. So in this video, we're going to look at the rates. I got to tell you, they're a big nothing burger, if you ask me. But we're going to look at those rates and then compare it to other options, both for inflation-protected investments, but also just for cash in general. I'll share what I'm doing, where we're keeping our cash now, and give you a bunch of alternatives that you might consider for your own investments. So with that, I've got my coffee. Let's dive right in. We'll begin with the new rate. Here it is. Drum roll, please. Yep, 4.28%. That is the new rate that will apply for I-bonds purchased. They use the fancy word issued between May 1st, that's today, and the end of October 2024. You'll get 4.28%. Now, it's important to understand how that rate is calculated. You'll see here, this is a really important line right there. It says the fixed rate is 1.3%, and you may be saying, if you're new to I-bonds, you're saying, well, how, wait a minute, Rob, if the fixed rate is 1.3, how am I going to earn 4.28? You got to remember that interest rates or yields on I-bonds are comprised of two things. This fixed rate, and that stays the same for the life of the bond. I-bonds are for 30 years. So if you hold that bond for 30 years, you don't have to, we'll talk about that in a minute, but if you hold the bond for 30 years, you're guaranteed to get that fixed rate of 1.3%. And then on top of that, you'll get an inflation rate. And that inflation rate, when you add them together today, you get the 4.28%. But the inflation rate changes every 6 months based on changes in the CPI numbers, the inflation numbers. So you've got to remember that the interest rate is comprised of those two components. You can actually see it right down here. But the fixed rate is important. So effectively, if you're buying an I-bond today, what that means is you're going to get a real rate of return, that is to say an after inflation rate of return of 1.3%. And that's important. Remember that number. We're going to come back to it in just a minute when we talk about tips. But I want to point out a few things with I-bonds that we need to keep in mind. One, you got to buy them through Treasury Direct. You can't go to Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard or anywhere else. You got to buy them directly from the government through Treasury Direct. You are limited to how much you can purchase, $10,000 a year. There are ways to get around it. You can add $5,000 with a tax refund. There are other sort of creative strategies. We've talked about them on the show in the past. But still, you are limited to what you can purchase. So if you're looking at like asset allocation and you've got your retirement money and you want to put a significant amount of money into inflation protected securities, I-bonds aren't going to do it. I suppose they could be part of that answer for you, but you're probably going to have to turn to TIPS, which we'll talk about in a minute. TIPS can be purchased through ETFs and mutual funds. They are traded on the market, unlike I-bonds. So there are a number of limitations with I-bonds. Sort of hoops you have to jump through, and you, I guess, decide for yourself whether it's worth all of that fuss. Now, there is one advantage that appeals to a lot of people with I-bonds. You can always sell the I-bonds back to the government. There are some limitations, not in the first 12 months, and if you sell it within the first 5 years, there's an interest rate penalty that you get hit with 3 months worth of interest. But subject to those rules, you sell them back to the government at face value. There's no change in the value of I-bonds as interest rates rise or fall. That's not true with TIPS. The value of TIPS do rise and fall based on changes in interest rates, as we saw firsthand in 2022. But again, yeah, it's nice that you can always sell those I-bonds back to the government at face value, but in addition to the hoops and limitations on when you can sell and possible interest rate penalties, there's another big limitation or sort of thing to be aware of with I-bonds. Let's go back to Treasury Direct. Remember, the fixed rate is 1.3%. So you're effectively getting a real rate of return, an after inflation rate of return of 1.3%. How does that compare to TIPS? Well, not so good. If we look at the 10-year TIP, and this is as of today, this is live on CNBC. The yield is 2.29%, and you can understand that again as a real rate of return, because just like I-bonds, TIPS adjust for inflation too. They adjust in a different way rather than changing the interest rate like I-bonds do. They change the actual underlying value of the bond, but effectively, particularly over long periods of time, they do a very similar thing, and that is protect us against inflation, but rather than a 1.3% real yield, you're getting 2.289%. Now, this is on the 10-year tip. Since I-bonds are 30-year bonds, maybe we should look at the 30-year yield, and it's currently even a bit higher, 2.411%. And so not only do you have to deal with the sort of crazy ways you've got to buy it and the limits to what you can buy and the limits on when you can sell, you also have to accept a lower real yield, a significantly lower real yield in my view. So I'm actually much more of a fan of TIPS today than I am of I-bonds. So that's the comparison, at a high level between TIPS and I-bonds. But then that raises an even bigger question, and that is, should we be looking even beyond inflation-protected securities, particularly just for an emergency fund or money you plan to spend in the short term? And I actually think there's some really good alternatives, and I'll walk through a couple of those with you right now. The first would be just good old T-bills. This is from the Fidelity website. And you can see this is the 3-month T-bill. It's 5.4%. This is where we park. I'm going to make this a little bigger. This is where we park a lot of our money. The 6-month is just 1 basis point lower, 5.39. 9-month is 5.35. You can actually go out to 2 years and still be over 5, but the 1 year is 5.25. And this would be true with any U.S. government bonds, but there's no state income tax. These are extremely marketable. When I go to place either a buy or sell order for a T-bill through a broker, you could use Schwab, you could use Fidelity, for example. I literally click the button to place the order, whether it's a buy or sell, and then I immediately refresh the screen and the order's already filled. I mean, it happens as fast as my computer can refresh the screen. So it's a highly, a very liquid market. And I think the yields are great. You still get the benefit of no state income tax if that's important to you. And that's frankly where we're keeping our cash that we're going to be spending, say, over the next 6 to 12 months. I think T-bills are a great option. But we have more. So the other thing you can do is just go to a basic savings account. And I track several hundred here. This is actually going to be changing, and I'll let you know about that in the near future. But we track, I think, more savings accounts than in just about any site on the internet. Certainly a lot more than like a Bankrate or NerdWallet. And our top rate is 5.55. That's from My Banking Direct. Let's make sure this. Always want to make sure the interest rates that we've got are correct. We work hard to make sure they're correct, but we make mistakes. Yes, so that's still 5.55. We've got Poppy Bank, which you got to love the name of that. Poppy Bank's at 5.50. A real popular one on my site for some reason. Some folks don't like to open up accounts at banks they've never heard of, even though they're FDIC insured. This CIT Bank offer, it's a $5,000 minimum deposit. It's 505. That tends to be a really popular savings account on our site with users. But I guess the big takeaway is there are plenty of savings accounts that are paying above 5% FDIC insured. And so a lot of good options there. I will mention briefly, you can find some pretty good bank bonus deals too. I was looking at one from Wells Fargo on a savings bonus up to 525. I'll leave links to all of this below the video. We track a number of bonuses and try to keep this as up to date, but there are a lot of different options. Actually, a lot of bonuses on checking accounts. I see that more often than I do savings accounts, but you do see savings account bonuses from time to time. So I mention that because depending on how much you're going to have in your savings account, the bonuses, even if it comes with an account that pays a lower interest rate, could be high enough that it just makes more sense to go that route than to worry about getting the absolute highest interest rate you can find. So something to keep in mind. The last thing I want to show you are certificates of deposit. And what I'm showing you is actually not live yet. You can't access this page. This is back over on allcards.com. I'm working on making, and this is how all of the savings account pages, CD pages are going to work here very shortly. I hope to have this live later this week. But what I've done is, this is every CD that we track. You can see we track 953 of them at the moment. And then I've got it set up so that you can filter by the length of the CD. So if we wanted to come down here and just look at 1 to 3 months, so this is the best deal that we can find, 542. Again, always make sure that the rates are correct directly with the financial institution. We work hard to keep them accurate, but we're not perfect. If you wanted to look at 4 to 6 and see what you could get there. I'm going to add here, by the way, an option for no penalty CDs as well. And I'll leave a link to that below the video. But so this one, yeah, $5.55 for a 4 to 6 month CD. Of course, you can also search. So if you've got a bank you're looking for, I don't know, I'll probably type one in here we don't have. Surely we have Marcus. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So there's Marcus by Goldman Sachs. So you could search for a specific bank. I will tell you that on these pages, we tend to focus on banks that are available either nationwide or in large areas of the country. It's just too much to try to put in the thousands of local and community banks that are out there. But I mention it because depending on where you live and what banks are available to you, you might find better deals than what we can find, even though we're tracking 1,000 CDs and hundreds of banks and savings accounts, you still might be able to find a better deal. So always keep that in mind. So that's sort of my high-level take. I got to tell you, with I-bonds, I'm not buying them. That there's the hassle factor. Now, when it was paying 9%, the hassle factor was worth it. But at this point, given that the fixed rate is just 1.3, I can do much better than that on tips in terms of real yield, and that for shorter term savings, something I'm not going to hold for a long time, might spend in the next 6 to 12 months. Frankly, I think T-bills are a better deal. And even just a good old savings account or maybe a short-term CD or no penalty CD is going to do better. So that's my take on I-bonds. Maybe you have a different view. If you do, or if you have questions, leave them in the comments below. Be happy to help you out any way I can. Until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.